Well, I am really excited to welcome our next speaker on stage. I have to say, when we did our dry run, I did not think that packaged software solutions could get me so excited or capture my attention. So I think that really speaks to how well Lisa goes and takes us on a journey. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lisa Hill, VP of Tech Strategy at Argon Digital, to come take the stage.
Why, thank you. I don't think we need that, right? No, I'm mic'd up. We don't want to double feedback. All right, so they asked me to use a remote, which is always a technical challenge. So I'll give you just a little bit of background on me. So I live in Austin, Texas, though I'm originally from Ohio, if you're picking up that accent. People from Ohio don't actually have accents, but that's what they say. So I've actually been with Argon Digital since 2005, or since the dawn of time, as they like to say, and I've worn many, many hats. But currently I'm running in this technology strategy role, which is super cool for me because I get to think about what's the future of our company, where we're going with technology, what are the new platforms that we want to invest in. So I have a background in computer science, though that was on a dare. I wanted to be a math major, and my best friend dared me to major in computer science so she could have a buddy. She promptly dropped out, and I got stuck with a career. I have two great kids back in Austin and a pretty great husband. And I like to say that I'm a born-again runner. I used to run marathons before those kids. I just started again about 8 weeks ago, clearly not running marathons quite yet. And I'm also a diehard Cleveland Browns fan. And those things are on the same bullet point because it's the same level of craziness that makes you a marathon runner and a Browns fan. Those go hand in hand. All right, so enough about me. We're going to introduce Betty. So everybody say, hi, Betty. Hi, Betty. So Betty has been tasked by her management to find a packaged software solution that's going to solve some of the problems her company's been having lately. And she's written requirements before for custom solutions, but she's never done this kind of project, and she's a little nervous, and she's asking herself some of these kinds of questions. So today, our mission is to give Betty a kickstart for success. So I'm going to walk you through what a typical software selection process might look like, maybe one you've followed before, maybe talk about some of its shortcomings. And I'm going to give you an introduction into maybe an alternative approach that we can use to help give Betty some success. And then we're going to walk through some sample projects as we go through this so you really can solidify in how to use some of these techniques on your own. So before we really get started into our formal agenda, why are we talking about packaged software and SaaS solutions? Really, custom software, like from the ground up, is just becoming more and more rare. The flexibility that is offered with packaged software and even SaaS solutions today is actually becoming pretty incredible. And what's really driving this is cost effectiveness. So like buying and configuring something to meet your needs is often a better alternative than building something from the ground up. But it does come with certain traps. So you don't want to pay for a ton of features that your organization doesn't use. I have a client who has bought tons and tons of modules of a certain software platform, and they're using like 2 of them, but they pay this bill every year for all these pieces that they don't use. You don't want to be them. And a careful software kind of selection process can really make sure that you're getting the right package for your company's needs. So let's get started. Our typical approach to software selection. Maybe it looks a little something like this. Tell me if you can nod your head if you've done this before. So someone tells you, hey, we need to go buy a thing. We need a ERP, or we need an order management system, or we need this cool widget. And so you like, yep, that's what we need. So I go, and maybe I go to Gartner, and I see who's the leaders in the quadrant, and I write down some cool features, and I craft me up an RFP. And then, based on the answers, maybe you kind of pick some of your favorites, and then you do a demo and a Q&A with them, and they tell you all this really awesome stuff, and you pick one, and that's the winner, right? And really, project teams that get this mission are under a lot of pressure, because it's packaged software, right? It's supposed to be fast. So they're moving fast to try and get it done. There's a lot of challenges through this process, though. So there can be a lot of different options out there. And when they're thinking about all the things that needs to do, vendor here, vendor there, they're talking about all kinds of features. And how do you balance what all of those are? Do you need all of those? And then I'm going to tell you, believe it or not, this is a secret, vendors sometimes misrepresent the capabilities of their software package. I'm just going to tell you that the answer to every question is, does it do this? Is yes. 100%, yes it does. Yes it does, yes it does. And so that misrepresentation maybe is going to make it a little bit interesting for you to evaluate fairly. You're not really sure if it's going to actually meet your current business processes, and it may be setting some unrealistic expectations for your users of what they're really going to get, which can lead them to reject that. So really, there's got to be a better way, right? Well, of course there is, because that's why I'm here today. So the secret to this is actually going to be requirements. So I'm going to offer you a software selection requirements-driven approach to picking the best software. And why do we need these requirements? So I swear to God, it did not have the things go over top of it in the version that I've been seeing all week. So just so you know, so before you have requirements, you might think of your need as that pink box that's over there, and the thing that you're going to buy is that blue thing on the left. And so when you're starting out, everything, yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I need. But after you've done some requirements, you actually figure out your need's a little more complex. It's got a little bit of shape to it. And the solution that you need maybe needs to morph with that. What you don't want to do is figure out that fit after you've already implemented the thing. What we want to do is figure out what are those actual needs that we have before we've actually bought the thing. So what might an improved process for selecting software look like? So before we even identify what is the thing that we're buying, what are those candidate software packages, before we do any of those, we're actually going to identify and prioritize some criteria, some requirements, if you will, for the thing we're building. What is it we actually want and need? And we're going to use that, so I've inserted that purple step, before we even pick out the things to evaluate. And then we're going to take that list of all the things that we need, all the things that the users need, all the things that the business needs, and we're going to create an initial evaluation criteria list, a smaller subset, that if you will, that is prioritized, that's the things we actually most care about. We're going to take that list, and we're going to actually narrow down the field. So we're not going to open up and talk to everybody that's out there. We're not going to create this RFP that gets 100 responses. We're going to narrow down the vendors and only give it to a few and ask them for a response. Then after they respond, and we'll do some demos and actually talk to them, we're going to evaluate that software against our full set of criteria, all the things that we care about, maybe pilot it, we'll talk more about that, and then actually pick our software. And so I do want to make a little nod to the RFP process here. Please don't ever do blind RFPs. They are rough. They're rough from a vendor perspective. They're rough from an evaluation perspective. If you do want to do formal RFPs, really, I consider RFPs really just asking for proposals, talking to people and trying to get solutions back. But unless your company truly mandates it, please don't make them blind. It's so much better to have an actual dialogue and be able to go back and forth. All right, that was my little soapbox. So we've got done our RFP process. We've got our full list of criteria. So before we begin to look at the available software packages, we're going to be looking at these requirements. What are the different types of requirements that we need to look at? So first and foremost, user requirements. So, and when selecting package software, most of what you're going to be looking at is what is the process that a user is actually going to walk through. You don't need necessarily all the detailed functional things because, in theory, the vendor already did that. They already figured out the nuts and bolts of what needs to get done. There's already a UI. So you're really thinking about what is the business process that the user is going to be walking through. You also want to consider the business rules, so if there are any policies or restrictions, corporate standards, industry standards, things like that that you need to enforce, you definitely want to consider those. The data needs. If you have, what is the data structures that you need within your organization? There are existing systems that you're going to need to integrate that data with, making sure that if it doesn't, chances of it just meeting your data needs completely out of the gate are very low. Can you extend that data model? Are you going to be able to get the information that you need into the system? And then there's the non-functional requirements, and I'll talk more about those in a second. But all of this is actually going to lead us to our desired software package. So that nod to non-functional requirements, I'm going to call this out here. I'm going to stop on the slide for a second. These non-functional requirements are going to be key for packaged software. So these I like to call the ilities, though technically not all of them end in an ility, but lots of them do. So usability and scalability and maintainability and extensibility and all the ilities. You're going to really just want to make sure that you don't miss these. So we'll kind of talk about that a couple of times. But these may not come out naturally as you're talking through business and kind of use cases. So really make sure this is something that you think about and kind of as a separate thing. All right, I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to have a pop quiz. Spot the missing letter. I know you guys are experts on the alphabet. You've been working with the alphabet your entire life, right? Where is the missing letter? Well, this is kind of analogous to a business system where you're trying to spot the missing requirement. What is the piece that is missing? So this is the letters A through I with one of them missing. Did anybody get the missing letter yet? So if you didn't, the missing letter was E. And the trick that we are going to take today is how to use visual models to help you arrange information so that you can spot the missing requirements. Those things that are going to be critical that you may just have missed, even though you're an expert in your business process, just like you all were an expert in the alphabet, how you are going to spot the missing things. And so that's going to be the bulk of our talk today, is to look at what are some visual models that we can use in order to make sure we're not missing any requirements so that we can drive our successful outcomes. And there's really 4 different categories of these that we think about. I'm not going to go through all of them today. I'm just going to give you a smattering and some flavor. So there's objectives models, the business value of the system, people models showing who's using the system, how they're using the system, systems models, so detailing the interactions between systems themselves, and then data models, focusing on the information and how it's being modified. And the key is really to look at your solution from all of these angles. If you just look at it from a user's perspective or just look at it from a data perspective, you're not going to be getting the complete picture. It's really this kind of triangulating or quadrilating, that's not a word, but taking it from all these different views that can really get you that full picture. So we are, remember, in the software selection process right now. So what are a couple of models that stick out that can really help you make sure you have the right requirements for software selection? So there's 3 that kind of pop out to me right away, and we're going to take a deeper look at some of these. So the first is the business objectives model. It aids in really understanding that business problem that's at the heart of the project. A process flow, understanding how the business processes are being executed by people, and a feature tree to identify features in a packaged software solution. So start off with the business objectives model. So this is showing the tying the business problems to business objectives to drive product concept. And so how this works, you start at the beginning and say, you have a problem. What's preventing me from achieving our business goals? And then you ask yourself a question. You say, if we were to overcome this problem, how can we measure success? Okay, but what's keeping us from achieving that success today? And you start to keep asking yourself these questions, unrolling the layers until a product concept, until features pop out. I'm going to tell you that oftentimes it doesn't work like this. What often happens is someone comes and says, hey, we're going to get a thing, and it's going to solve our things, and it needs this feature and this feature and this feature. So this is really important to think of in the opposite direction, too. So you want to tie the things that you're doing to actual business value. So in the opposite direction, you can go with, hey, someone tells you, I need this thing. Why? Be the petulant 5-year-old. Why do you need it? Why? What is that doing for you? Why? Keep asking that question, why. It'll drive you to the heart of those business requirements. And all of the great thing about this model is it's really putting it all in one place, that it's tying the high-level things that you're doing back to quantified business problems that's going to be able to allow you to prioritize. Now, I have talked a lot of words when I said pictures. We like to pictures because pictures are easy and words are hard. So let's give an example, because that's actually how I learn, is through an example. At Argon Digital, we do a lot with e-commerce, so I'm going to actually talk you through an e-store today. That's the example we're going to follow through as we go through all of these sample models today. And we start off here where our core business problem is that our online ordering process is inefficient, and that's getting me a lot of cart abandons and the screen is flickering. It's giving me a little bit of a strobe, just so you all know. So they're giving cart abandons and lost revenue opportunities. And so, you ask your management, what would success look like? What if we overcame those objectives, what that look like? And so if 85% of our initiated orders actually resulted in a purchase, that would be success. But what are the problems? Why are we not having that today? Well, entering shipping information is taking a really long time. And you know what? My repeat customers have to re-enter all of their order information every time, even though they just want to reorder. And so you can see that this continues to drive the layers that eventually pop into actual features that you might be able to build or use in a system. And then the more of these features, a specific feature, the more business objectives it's tied to, the more business problems it's tied to, that can bubble up what are the most important ones for you to tackle. We find that this model is really great for being able to justify your spend, justify why you're going, really having everybody on the same page with, why am I actually doing this project? Next one was a process flow. Process flow is a people model. This is about how the people interact. What are the business processes and how the people do things? Not the systems, but the people. And you can, this actually looks very similar to the BPMN, that notation language, right, for documenting workflows and things like that. There's 160 different widgets in that language. We're trying to simplify it down to just a couple of things. So really, we've got our boxes, which is a step to do something, and we've got diamonds, which are decisions. And you can have different swim lanes, so and those are really representative of the different players, the different people that are taking these business steps. So maybe one swim lane is sales, another swim lane is marketing. And it allows you to take you step by step through what needs to happen and really make sure that nothing is missing. And I'm going to give you a hint. When you're looking for requirements, one great place to look is in any of those diamond decision points. There's probably some requirements that would pop out surrounding that. Another thing to kind of think about as you're going through this process flow, this is really all about, remember, it's a way to drive requirements and organize requirements. You can think about what are the sets of requirements that go along with this particular business process. And I will tell you that when you get to that vendor eval stage where somebody is actually doing a demo, have them give them your process flows as a script. Make them actually walk through. How is it actually going to work? That's going to give you a real good sense of what it's going to actually be like for your business users when you have to see those end-to-end processes going. So let's go back to our example. Here's our e-store process flow. And process flows can really be articulated at multiple levels. I actually have two different levels here. So the highest level, we call this L1, that's at the top. And you can think about it that, what does executive management care about? So it's a very, very high level picture. They don't need details, they got people for that. They just want the very highest level picture. But then you kind of unravel from there. So we're going to break out level 3, the actual transaction of purchasing. What are the steps in that process? And this is our level 2. This is more like the middle management. So they don't need to know all the details, but they need to know a little bit more. And you can even continue to go down from there. Spoiler alert, we're actually going to dig into that in our account information step a little bit later. But that's really what the frontline folks would care about. So how many levels you're going to need is really going to depend on the complexity of your business processes. And remember, we're still in software selection. We're not implementing yet. So probably just this level, the level 1s and level 2s, those are probably going to be sufficient for what you need right now. All right. Any questions? You can interrupt me if you want. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. All right. Next is, oops, wrong button. Feature trees. I know that it doesn't look like a tree unless the tree died, but if you imagine that it fell over, it's a feature tree. And so at the root of the feature tree is that product concept, that thing that you're actually buying, the widget, if you will. And then as the branches over that, feature is really just a description of an area of functionality. It's really just a collection of requirements, and they have these layers and levels to them as well. If you were to look at this feature tree, if you were to map this back to that business objectives model where I had the product concept on the right and then some key features in it, that each one of those L1 features should map to one of these L1 features on this feature tree. So executive stakeholders really love this kind of a model because it gives them a picture of everything they're getting on one piece of paper. I really like it because it gives me a way for me to organize and categorize my thoughts of all the different kinds of things. Think about the things that you might be missing by putting like things with like. Developers like this because it actually it shows them all the things that they're on the hook for implementing and then hence estimating. And so really, again, we're going to be using this to derive our requirements. And so you can imagine, just like in the process flows, you could have requirements tied to certain process steps. Here we can have requirements tied to specific features. You want to kind of keep things simple in here. Nothing too complex. And if I go to our sample, here's the one. This just enumerates maybe what a feature tree would look like for this e-store and this custom order management solution that we know we need to have. Let me actually tell you a quick story. We were one time doing some requirements training for a company, and they happened to be coincidentally in a process of selecting some software. They knew requirements are important, and they'd done a bunch of requirements work before they started their process. But then when they started talking to the vendors, they got all excited by all the shiny widgets that the vendors were showing them. And so they kind of lost sight of what was important. So when we grounded them back in this model, they actually took the time to map out their requirements. They actually realized that the software packages the vendors were bringing forth actually didn't fit most of their important features that were the ones that they actually needed. And so the good thing is this allowed them to change directions then before they'd bought and implemented something to make sure that they're getting the right software. Because these are the things that are actually driving, that are tied to that business problem. They're actually driving the value. It doesn't matter how cool this widget is over here. What you really want is to make sure you have the features that map back to what you need. All right, so this gives us an idea of some visual models that we can use in order to help drive some of our requirements. What does this process really look like in play? So Betty, she's going to go take her organization. She's going to really try and document what does that current process look like. She's going to document the as-is process flows. What you're going to typically find in a lot of organizations, there's not a whole lot of documentation about how anything works. And so this is going to be really creating things from the ground up. She's going to use these models in order to figure out what are the important requirements to her organization. And then she's also going to not forget all those really important non-functional requirements that I talked about earlier. So now she's a handful of models, and she has a set of requirements. How is she going to actually evaluate what software to buy? So there's definitely going to be more than one package solution option out there. She's going to need a method for figuring out the best one for her. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I'm going to offer you an approach today that is a quantitative approach. So what we are going to say is that list of requirements that Betty created, we're going to actually weight each one. And we're going to do that by giving it a priority scale. So how important is this feature to my business? Would I even consider this software if it didn't have this feature? Or is it a nice to have? We're going to rate each of those requirements. And then we're going to rate all the candidate packages against our requirements. Does it have it? Does it not have it? Does it have it if you stand on your right foot and go like this? Does it have it only if you are hopping on your left foot? What is the level at which and you can get partial credit, right? These are not necessarily binary. Nobody's going to say it doesn't do it at all, so you're going to get no zeros. But figure out what do you think is actually that, how much they're fulfilling that requirement. And then we're going to use that to calculate a weighted score. So you're going to take the priority times the tool score for a criteria, and we're going to add them all up. And that total sum of the weighted scores, that's going to kind of bubble up for you, your winner. Now, I'm not going to say do this in a vacuum. You do need to consider other variables. Price is always one of those variables, just so you know. But think about things, too, about how good it is to actually work with the company, those sorts of intangibles as well. So taking through a quick example, when we did one of these, just to give you some kind of metrics. So we were doing a requirements selection for actually a requirements management tool. And so we started out, we had 60 vendors, and we measured that against 30 features. So we had identified 200 features that were actually important to us in some way, but we took the top 30 of them, and we evaluated across all 60 of our candidate packages. We used that to narrow down to 16 vendors, which we evaluated against the full 200 features, and then pulled it down to 5 vendors, which we actually did a piloting of a real project. Now, I understand these are still some really big numbers. It doesn't have to be that you go with 60 and 16, but it's the same idea that you're going to start with a larger amount with lesser features, and then once you've narrowed down, consider that full set of the requirements. A little nod to the try before you buy. I think that there might even be some people in this room that have learned a lesson about wanting to try solutions before you buy them. We actually had an e-commerce customer that came to us, and he had picked an ERP platform that looked just so good. It checked all the boxes. The vendor said they could do all the things. But as soon as he actually started implementing, he realized that, yes, while it could configure this, while you could extend this, there were actually some hidden limitations in that became obvious as soon as he piloted it. So there's something to still be said for actually getting a trial and actually testing things, and then never forget about that actual experience, subjective experience working with a vendor before you make your final choice. All right, so requirements for implementation. We picked our software, but the process is not done. What do we do now? Well, we're going to need more requirements, of course. And how many, like the scale of how many requirements you're going to need, you're going to need an increasing amount depending on like how much you're going to be able to just use the thing that you're buying out of the box versus, if you're really going to have to configure it, customize it, extend it, integrate it, the further right you move on the spectrum, the more you're going to need. One advantage of buying this COTS software, like commercial off-the-shelf software, is that sometimes there's some capabilities that are in there that weren't on your must-have list, but are things that once you actually start talking, they're like, oh my gosh, I actually do really need that. I didn't even know I needed it. And so you're going to have to think about what are the requirements for actually implementing those if they're things you have not yet considered. So what kind of requirements might you need? So since we're talking packaged software, you're probably going to need some configuration requirements. Unless you really are in standalone mode, and this thing is something that is not going to just need to be an integrated part of your ecosystem, you're probably going to have some integration requirements that you need to consider. No matter how great the solution, there's probably going to be some gaps. And so, you need to think about, in this world, do you want to fill those gaps? Maybe there's a piece of functionality that's missing. Are you just going to ignore it? Are you going to change your business process so that it doesn't actually matter? or are you going to actually customize it? And so this is one of those that I would say really think about, because you're going to have to deal with maintaining that anything that you do and extend, you're going to have to think about how is that going to be resilient to changes by the vendor later. I also will say that probably half the time when I see people implement some sort of custom feature, if it is like, seems like, why doesn't the product have this? If they just wait another year, it probably will. So really think about, you want to tie anything you're doing, make sure it's tied back to that business value to really justify that spend. And then last, data requirements. Just like the functional gaps, there's likely to be some data gaps, maybe some entities that are not fully modeled to have all the information that you need. You do not want any data left behind as you're replacing existing systems or integrating systems. So you want to think about making sure that you have an ability to extend, and how are you going to extend that data model to make sure that you're not losing anything in migration. All right, so key models for implementation. I have 14 seconds left. I'm just going to go 2. I could give you 4, but I'm just going to use 2. Key models for implementation. The first, the KPI model, and then an ecosystem map. So this looks very similar to the process flow that we had earlier, but we're going to actually put some key performance metrics, some basically performance things of how long it takes to do a thing. We're going to tie that back to those business processes. So these are really good for ensuring that your business outcome, when a significant part of a system is being replaced, doesn't degrade in any way. So legacy conversion projects, things like that. One thing that I will comment is that sometimes a specific step actually may get slower, and that actually may be okay. And maybe it takes more to intake right here because we have to enter more data, but it's making our overall business process faster. And so, you're really keeping in kind of your sights, what is that performance that I'm expecting? So if we look at this little sample store, remember I told you we were going to go revisit that create the account information step. You can see that we've just exploded this out down to an L3, and we have some specific timings that we're requesting here. So the real value out of this model is that we are going to tell the development team exactly what our expectations are for performance of that any step in this system. And actually, if we're not going to meet the performance requirements, it's going to give us an opportunity to go reset those expectations with the business. And then also gives us a way to prioritize different features. And so a real-world example of this, we were working with a company that was doing loan processing apps, and maybe they were doing like 30 a day. But they really wanted a magical PDF generator that was going to be this like automatic PDF generator that was going to be so cool. But when we looked at the process and what the speed was, it actually wasn't going to speed things up that much. So we were able to cut that feature, as cool and shiny as it was, save them a bunch of money, and it actually didn't take away from the overall business objective they were trying to meet. And last, I'll just leave you with the ecosystem map. So this is the relationship between the systems in your project. Which systems communicate data behind them. So every box is a system, every arrow is data moving. Now this is not a technical architecture document. There are no databases on here. There are no load balancers on here. There's no proxy servers on here. This is all the logical systems as your business would think about it. And there actually could be a single system, a single piece of hardware that actually houses 2 pieces of logical thing. So if maybe the product catalog and the order management is all within one platform, so you can still model those as 2 different boxes. This is really useful in understanding the whole picture of the system and how things interact, really giving you context for your project. It helps you be able to pinpoint which of those integrations are in scope, which ones are not in scope. And also, in addition to the actual interfaces that you directly have to build out and deal with, it actually is giving you the downstream and upstream ramifications to think about as well. So if we go to our sample, if I were doing the order processing box, even though I don't actually touch the product catalog directly, you can still get a sense of how that is impacting. So if there is a change, you can consider, is it going to impact that other system? And you can coordinate with those teams appropriately so you don't miss anything. I had 2 more, but I think we're out of time. Oh, we're not out of time. Oh, it reset. I have 13 more minutes with you. You're going to have to listen to me yammer on about requirements and visual models for another 13 minutes, or at least another like 5, and then we can take questions. All right, so I will stop trying to like talk so fast that my head explodes. We have 2 more models I walk you through, the BDD, the business data diagram, and a state diagram. So these are really interesting if your implementation where data is a really important factor in your project. These are 2 great ones to have. So the BDD, this really bounds the system from a data perspective. Again, this is how users think about the data. This is not an actual database implementation. It is how the business thinks about it. And really, what's most interesting about it is it allows you to figure out what is missing from your other requirements, from your other models. So data is only ever created, deleted, edited, used, moved, or copied. Did I miss anything? That's the only things you do with data. But you can potentially do those things with all the data. So, as you're going in and thinking about it, what are your processes for interacting with the system? Have you considered what happens if you do something like delete a customer? What actually happens? What are all of the ways that the system will react as you interact with that data? And how this model reads, so it has both the objects and the cardinality. And so you read it like this. So every order has one and only one order status. Every order status, pending, for instance, could apply to any number of orders. Every order belongs to one and only one customer, but a customer can have any number of orders. Same thing with shipping address. I will tell you, the most controversial one of these things these days, I think, is email address. Did you know that many systems expect that you will have a unique email address, and so a customer can only have one email address? Maybe it supports they can have more than one, but an email address can definitely only apply to one customer. Well, that, I'm telling you, is not always the case. So that actually will trip you up in a lot of systems. So I'm going to give you a little tip that has nothing to do with my presentation today, but in case you ever need it, because not everybody knows this life hack, if you have a Gmail address, and you need it to be able to have a single Gmail address, but make it be multiple unique identities for you, you can add a plus sign and then any random word, and that makes it a unique email address as far as the system is concerned typically, but it all goes to the same inbox. So for instance, my personal email, don't abuse it, is lchristian@gmail.com. So I can do lchristian plus Workato, and then any Workato spam will go, it'll go to that same email box, but I can make a rule and siphon it off to the side. But really, what can be pretty awesome for is if you're testing or, yes? It's a
also applies for Google Enterprise.
Yeah, it's a great life hack. So if you learn nothing else during this day, if you didn't know that life hack is a very, very important one. It has nothing to do with visual models, but really important for, I don't know, basically testing. I don't know, but sometimes you have to because a system doesn't do it. Kids' schools, sometimes the software they use, it's real bad like that. All right, so that was our BDD. And last up, I pressed the wrong order button again. Last up is state diagram. So this is great when you have a single business entity that really goes through multiple incarnations of the life cycle. And so each circle has a state, and then every arrow is the transition, or what is the trigger that causes the movement from one state to another. And I have shown both on here, both a state diagram and a state table. The state table is really great for if you want to really enumerate and think about every single possible combination and whether something can move from one state to another. Really, the state diagram is good for tracing kind of an end-to-end path through things of how does the business object actually move through that flow. So our example with the e-store, You start off with added to cart, and it goes to checkout and submitted and processing, and it can go all the way around. I'll note that a state diagram doesn't always, or a business process doesn't always have to have like a final and a terminating state. Like in this case, something might actually end in received, and just the customer, it just lives there happily, and they never have to return it. It never has to go through the return process. You can have ones that are circular. Really, this is just great about making sure that you understand that whole flow that that business object needs to go through. All right, so that is all the models that I'm going to cover today. The high-level takeaway from all this is that in order to find the right solution, we're going to start with high-level requirements. We're going to evaluate our solutions, and we're going to pick a package. Then we're going to do detailed requirements before we implement it to get us to that solution. And that is it from me. Any questions? If you want to come hang out with me on social media, or my company on social media too, I'll leave you with those things so that you can reach out if you want to get a hold of me. Yes? I
is this working? Bake-off. Obviously, you went down from 60 to 60 to 5. You probably got down to 2 for the financial discussion.
So the piloting stage essentially would be that bake-off, right? So this is an interesting thing, because I both am the advocate for my clients all the time, and then I also sometimes am representing software vendors, right? I will say that it is worth putting money into a paid proof of concept. If this is a mission critical system and you're trying to base your whole organization around it, right, it is probably worth it to actually put some dollars into actually doing a real use case, picking something that is meaningful and tricky, and actually getting your hands on it and using it. And I actually don't think it is fair to ask a solution partner or a vendor to do your whole project for you for free. So my personal thing would be, I do think piloting is really valuable, but you ought to consider the best bake-offs that I've participated in. You do that, the company does that due diligence to get down to that small set, and then that bake-off is making sure and vetting out that, okay, it says that it checks all the boxes, let me actually get my hands on it and truly make sure that it does, and ferreting out any of those areas of risk. Yeah?
And it was ultimately what we chose was expensive than the other one at the bake-off also, because it's more about the technology and the long-term vision of that particular product. So I think the bake-off was actually important to see that even though price is low, it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Price is a factor, but it should not be the only factor.
Especially for the mission critical
And I will
application,
say that in that piloting stage, you will get as much out of it as you put into it. So doing just a simple 1 week trial, just set up something. I mean, actually, it can tell you if it's really bad. It might actually tell you a lot by telling you if it's really bad. But is it really going to work for your business? You probably need to put a little bit more effort into it.
Yeah, and one of the vendors we were actually trying very recently, they were not ready to do POC. So that itself told that check them out, even though they were the leading vendor.
Yeah.
So.
I will say one thing to try and do is to be equitable in it, set some specific business goals that you're trying to achieve. What is that? The actual things you need to see from it, and evaluate not only can it do it, but what was the experience like to do it. So what was that rollout like? What was it actually like to work with the vendor when something didn't quite work right? How was getting support from them? What was that experience? That'll tell you actually a lot. All right. Somebody else. You have to wait.
Where does customer journey mapping fit in the approaches you were talking about? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to me, that's kind of part of that is you're thinking of what is the people processes, how does somebody work through your customer, work through your ecosystem? What is their journey with your company? That would kind of fall into that people category of stuff. I don't know that we have a specific model, like visual model for like the customer journey mapping itself. That's, to me, is more of like a holistic process that you go through, and you might have different visual models that come out at all kind of the various stages in there. Good question. All right. Thanks, everybody.